All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to People Talking Sitting Down, episode number 5. This is a conversation that I was absolutely stoked to have, and I'm even more excited to share it. For conversation number 5, I was able to sit down with two of my good friends, Aston and Mike. These guys are not only my friends, but these are young men that I've looked up to my entire life. A few years older than me. I've always enjoyed the way that, I've been able to observe the way that they walk into a room and brighten everything up for everybody in that room. During this episode, we mainly talk about wrestling and Mike and Aston's career in wrestling, how that's affected not only their mental health, but their mental toughness, their physical toughness, and just really a bunch of different aspects of working hard as a wrestler. Definitely not an easy sport, but it was a lot of fun to learn about the mental game within it was a lot of fun to learn about the mental game on the mat and off the mat as well. But again, thank you guys for tuning in for episode number 5. If you'd like to support the podcast, please follow at People Talking Sitting Down on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be there. But thank you guys for listening, and thank you so much. Thank you so much to Aston and Mike for having this conversation. It was a blast. All right, I'll see you guys. I want to preface this conversation with a warning that we will be discussing difficult and sensitive topics throughout this episode. Terms or topics we use or discuss during this episode may be viewed as inappropriate if viewed or listened to out of context. This podcast focuses on the past, the present, the future, and our ever-changing reality. My hope is, always has been, and always will be to continue to grow, learn, and change. I believe that when we stop changing, we die. And therefore, it is likely, if not guaranteed, that in the future, parts of this conversation may not age well. I know that and accept it. From the bottom of my heart, I ask for your acceptance, for your kindness, your understanding, and for your time. For I'm a flawed human interviewing flawed humans, searching for answers to questions that I know I may never find. Welcome to People Talking Sitting Down. I hope it's worth your time.
I'm not the best, when it comes to preparation, I'm trying to get better with that, but I don't take anything as the end all be all. There's always another one, right? So use it as feedback and opportunity to do what you do well. And if it doesn't work out, then take your opportunities where they are and learn from it and continue to build. And I don't necessarily think that putting pressure on yourself is necessary. I think pressure is a privilege, and I do my best work when there's more pressure on the line. I need that little edge of all right, this is important. If something isn't important to me, I don't give it as much effort. It's kind of weird. I can't get up for it. When something's really important, it's a switch turns on and I'm ready to go. And I think that has a lot to do with wrestling, to be completely honest. That innate ability to just turn it on when I have to. And then getting on a plane, it's I'm not anxious to fly because what am I going to do? Right. The plane goes down. I'm the last person that they're going to look to fly the plane. So what the hell?
It's a great way to look at it, I guess. Next time the lady next to you is having an anxiety attack, you're look, lady, if it goes down, it goes down.
Yeah.
What are you
looking at me for?
What are you going to do? What's that doggy bag going to do for you?
Yeah.
Throw up in it once.
Yeah. That is an interesting perspective though, especially with in terms of wrestling. That's again, with doing this, I have so many questions that are ripping through my head every second. Even when you were talking about sleep, I'm dude, how do you deal with that with wrestling? But
we'll talk about it.
To put that one on the back burner for a second. You said about preparing. Can you expand on that more when you said about how it ties into wrestling? Because when I never wrestled, but I can only relate to my preparation for lacrosse. So there's only so much that you can do lacrosse wise. And I wonder how it is with wrestling. You wrestle with these kids, these kids. I would think watching film as a wrestler, you can, and I don't know how to say this properly, but you can take out more value than in lacrosse, because lacrosse, there's so many variables. Wrestling, you can watch 10, matches of one kid and be dude, he's doing the same thing every single time.
I would also note, just when you think about when we grew up, and I kind of note, mentioned this in the pre notes, is It's just a different time. And I think Aston can allude to this because he's coaching now. Like when we were young, like there was things like the blog. I think the blog is something that's very unique to wrestling. If you try to think about it in any other context of sport, like these are grown men sitting online in a forum arguing back and forth about high school kids and wrestling. And like with wrestling, you didn't really have game film like you did. I played football, I played lacrosse, we used to watch some film. With wrestling, it's like you looked online, you looked at who they beat, their record, and then you would look in the forum and see what people are talking about these kids. And it's a wild reality. Like I don't think it really exists in many other sports the way it does in wrestling.
Yeah.
Do you remember that though?
Yeah, I mean, like it still happens today.
Yeah,
like thank
crazy.
God my kids don't know what it is. And
Yeah.
it continues to stay that way because it's just toxic. And from like a film standpoint, as a coach, like you prepare for certain opponents, and we can help provide context on like what they do, what their tendencies are, but like you can't focus too much on that because like you also have to focus on like what you're good at, right? Like if you're thinking too much about what someone else is going to do, then you're not thinking about like what you're good at, what you're going to do also. So like that's kind of where it comes back to like controlling what you can control. So you need to know it's good to have that context, but you can't go into a match just obsessing over what your opponent's going to do because you're using that energy to take away from like what you're going to do too. So like as a wrestler, I would have an understanding of what my opponent does, but I would still go out and mix it up regardless.
Yeah.
Now as a coach, I try to do it like from like a back-ended way of like I will, because we're still able to scrap with our guys, like me and my assistants, we're all young. So like what we'll do is we'll take a kid and we'll inadvertently wrestle like their opponent will. Not necessarily tell them what we're doing, but like innately they're adapting to how their opponent's going to wrestle. Then after you do it for a little bit, you start to like coach them through like, hey, like I'm going here, like this is what I'm doing, this is how you stop it, and then you do something else that's completely different, right? So now they know how to stop this, but then you're going to this other thing, and then go back to that first skill or tactic or what have you. But that's like, we do more of that towards like the postseason, like the end of the season, where like wrestling is also different too because the regular season doesn't really matter. Like it does from a team standpoint, but not an individual standpoint.
Wait, why is that? Well, I don't understand.
Because everyone qualifies for the first tournament of postseason.
Oh.
So everyone makes it, essentially. Like the first postseason tournament is sectionals when we were in high school, which is essentially leagues, right? It's like the Pac-10. It's not the Pac-10, but like think of it as the Pac-10.
Yeah.
Everyone qualifies for it. So you could have a 0-20 record, enter postseason, and theoretically make it to the state tournament.
That's interesting because when you sent, so like Aston sent over a couple articles of like the your wrestling season, different match reviews or whatever, and that was what one of the articles said. You're like, we're just focused on the postseason at this point. Like I guess I didn't get it at that time because.
Yeah. Also, like it was the end of the season. Like that was our last match.
Yeah.
Too, so like all we had left was the postseason. It was different when we were wrestling, like because our team was very, very good. So
Yeah.
we had, like, when your team is good, like the dual meets matter, right? Because you have to qualify for district duels, which is like the district tournament to qualify for states. So the top 16 teams in District 1 qualify. So you have to be within the top 16, just like lacrosse or football or what have you to qualify for the tournament. But the same thing, if once you qualify, doesn't matter. Everyone's 0-0.
Yeah. Yeah. And for like a bit of added context for, and I always do this in like the introduction and everything, but there's many reasons that I was excited to talk to both of you individually, but also together because there's as I mentioned, from a coaching aspect with you, Aston, personality wise and like leadership, like I've looked up to you guys my entire life. And I've said this to Mark and Max, like there's certain people with them when they walk into a room, it changes the energy, like just like that. And that's what you guys have always done for me. But on the wrestling side, I was really interested to like double click and dive in because our high school, and I know it's like high school sports, like who, but like, dude, there's a lot to learn from that. And especially when you guys were in the spotlight, like you were, like, it is different. It is, the level of scrutiny that you guys were under, there's like the matches you couldn't get into. There was competing fan sections. Like, it's like, it was different. And
it was fun. It was a cool spot to live in like point in time where we grew up, like Pennsylvania wrestling in and of itself is a different animal. And it was so fun to go away to college, like down south, and your Jersey kids, New York kids, Connecticut kids, all these guys, they want to talk about their local wrestling, and you're like, but it's not PA wrestling.
Yeah.
And all my Jersey buddies always used to like give you crap, like, Jersey could compete with PA, and it's like, nah. Like, you might have 2 or 3 kids across all your different weight classes that could come hang in PA and contend for a state championship, and I was never that good. Like, but like specifically to us, I always forget about this stuff because to your point, it's like 15 years ago at this point. But my senior year, your junior year, and Mr. Kramer is actually the one who like reminded me of this. He's like, you guys didn't give up double-digit points in the Pac-10 in a dual meet. And it's like, when you think about that, that's technically 3 wins. Like, the other team needs to get more than 3 wins again in a total of 14 matches. And I was like, there's no way that's right. And like, I had to go back onto the District 1 website and check it. And it was like, yeah, we didn't give up double digits to a Pac-10 team. And then that run was just fun in general, because it's the little things along the way where it feels like you don't remember anything. And then when you start thinking about runs like that, you like the little wins that were in there. Like, Colby Frank had pinned some kid he had no business beating. Johnny Bryant rolled around on his back to not get pinned for like 6 minutes straight.
Dude, he was so fun to watch.
Against Nazareth.
Yeah,
it was.
I was going to say, like, that was our turning point, was his junior year, my sophomore year. We made it to the state tournament. First time, I think a team from Chester County ever made it to the state tournament, and we wrestled Nazareth, who at that time was like ranked top 25 in the country. And it came down to the very last match of the duel. Mm-hmm. And we had no business even being in the match. Yeah. And just like things just started going our way. And that's when like the turning point for LNJ really like occurred. It was like, all right, like these guys are actually for real. And we brought back the majority of our team for his senior season, my junior season. But I remember that match because we actually, a lot of our foundation of our program is based off of Nazareth. So
how so?
Our high school coach is friends with their high school coach.
Okay.
We would go up there for a scrimmage every year at the beginning of the year, and their high school coach is like one of the greatest of all time, like in the country. Like, he's one of the best high school coaches of all time. I don't know exactly how the relationship started, but basically he came in when we were in elementary school, and the foundation was his foundation. So he came in, he taught like what they teach, how they teach it, like what their principles are, etc. And that's what our program is based off of. So a lot of people don't know that.
And so expand on that. Like, what is...
After we wrestled them in states, right? Like, it was just coincidental. Because like they're District 11, we don't wrestle them unless it's at the state tournament. The coach, I remember coming up to us and he was like, wow, that was fun, wasn't it? Like, their coach. And we almost beat them. Like, it would have been a massive upset. Like, yeah. Like, for him to do that, it was like that. But like, that just shows the person he is. So, like, yeah, it's about like the experience and the process for him. And like, I'm sure it was cool for him to come like all like 360 back. Yeah. To like what he taught.
Yeah. So what are those like principles? Because it is, and I remember reading this in the article as well, of like, OJR's White brings, ONJ's coaching style to Ruston. It's like, what is it? Because it's different. Like, there's like, you guys were freaks. Like,
it's the entire team. It's an intensity thing to like the Nazareth. That scrimmage every year used to set the tone, and like in terms of like, all right, we work pretty hard, but this is the prime example of like taking it serious. Like, you can say you work hard. A lot of people say they work hard, but it's like, doesn't matter if they're the worst kid in the room or the best kid in the room. They're all busting their ass. Yeah. And that was the one thing about the ONJ program too. And I think Duraflo and Brilla are owed a ton of props. Is the whole point is like you're pushing each other. It doesn't matter if you suck at wrestling. It's like there was kids who barely ever broke the varsity lineup. And they were there every single conditioning practice. And it's just the culture of wrestling. And it's so funny to make the parallels when you're jumping to the other sports, because I used to remember we used to be in the ridiculous shape at the end of wrestling season. It's the only way I made the varsity team as a freshman for lacrosse. And I'll never forget the immediate culture shock of, all right, freshman year of wrestling, I'm one of the worst kids on the team, but wrestled varsity, got my ass kicked, but the conditioning was what got me wins. Go to the lacrosse tryouts, and Connor Kelly, Cole Badorf are like screaming at me as I'm doing the mile run or whatever, because I'm way ahead.
Yeah.
And they're like, yo, dude, this is a team. Like, you don't do that. I'm like, no, this is how I'm going to make the team,
Yeah.
you know? And just hearing like that they didn't want to see me running ahead of them.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, you're going to make us look like shit. It's like, no, that's the wrestling culture. Is as much as you like the guy next to you, you wanted to win that every single race. And like Durathlon Brilla, like to his point about modeling it after other programs, the principles you're talking about, like Iowa was the other example they always used. And Brent Metcalf was kind of the guy at the time, where you look up videos of him and there's stories of him like literally beating the shit out of his teammates to win different conditioning races. Like they didn't matter. It was just, he wasn't going to let somebody beat him in anything. And it's like, those are the types of, it's not like principles where you write them out. It's more like, work harder. Nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
Nobody cares if you're second in the nation. There's that JV kid who's still trying to beat you to make that line.
Yeah.
He doesn't care.
And that's the culture thing. Cause like, that's again, from, and Mike, I think I told you this at the bar one time. I was like, dude, you would be the captain of a T-ball team. But like that's leadership. And I remember exactly, and I know it was a couple of years after the example that you used, but you were a lap and a half ahead of everybody else while we were running 6 laps to start. We're all jogging, we're messing, we're cutting, we're literally not even saying figuratively cutting quarters. When the coach was shooting on the goalie and would turn his back, we'd literally cut halfway across the field. And like you're a whole lap and a half, you're done, you're getting water by the time that we're still like, we would literally try to shave off an entire extra lap because like the guy didn't notice. And it was an entirely different, and that's the thing, it's like, not, all it takes is one. And I think that, again, you inspired others to join you in working hard like that, but it still takes, probably 3 or 4 people to get a whole team going, because, one person is going to do their best to change the culture.
Saying like a rising tide
lifts all boats.
Lifts all boats. Yeah. So like you need to have someone be the first, right? Like it certainly helps if there's more than one, but like also you have to eliminate the negatives too. Like if people are, and this is just life in general, like the people that you surround yourself with is like what you're going to ultimately become too. So like if you're around people who are negative all the time, like you're going to have more negative thoughts, and like that's just a terrible way to go through life. And it's just like cancers and anything. Like if you eliminate the bad, like it spreads just as easily as the good.
Yeah, it's funny. There's and I can't quote exactly what the study was, and I can never quote what the studies are that I quote because I've either read them or heard them. But it matters more when you go to college. It matters more who your roommate is and what their GPA is versus the college that you go to, as far as, again, like you're just saying, the people that you're surrounded by, it rubs off.
I think that positivity note is like the one thing that I really wanted to like expand on in terms of how I view things in general. And I think what gets me through like day-to-day challenges or even like big things like trauma or whatever it may be, is like you have to actively work towards eliminating that negative, like Aston said. And that's like something that's not like it's not just like sometimes or when you're having a bad day. It's like, no, at all times. Like, and you notice it in the workplace, you notice it anywhere you are. Like, that's why people like these like group gyms. It's like, that's what it's all about, is everyone has a positive mindset, but it's like, that needs to be within you. And I believe that more than anything is like, I have bad days. There's times where I don't want to be all upbeat, and it bothers me when people are like, well, what's wrong? Nothing has to be wrong. I'm just not at one of those highs right now.
Yeah.
But like I actively work towards eliminating like those negative thoughts in my head, because there's so many to be had,
And how do you I guess just expanding on like a couple of different ways that you do that, especially in the workplace, because that's something where I'm still struggling to this day to figure out like, and I'm not in the corporate working mode, but I'm like, dude, I'm such a like wear my everything on my sleeve kind of guy. So like when I'm having a bad day, like hiding it takes so much out of me. So like, but that's the thing is like, I think from you, and I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but like you're always seemingly in a good mood, upbeat.
Yeah, no, I try to feel that way, and I think I am, generally speaking. How I do it, I don't, honestly, I was thinking about that, like how to put it into words, and it almost makes me feel like it's like almost sociopathic tendencies where it's like you block everything out selfishly almost, where all the outside things that people normally let really get to them is really almost like worrying about perception, worrying about the opinion of others, worrying about how you're viewed, you know? And like, I obviously worry about that just like the next person, but I don't allow it to consume me. And ultimately my inner peace is like what matters most to me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, obviously I always want to do right by people, and that helps, is like knowing that, hey, I can rest my head at the end of the day. And even if I did offend someone, it was because I was just speaking exactly how I feel. And I do feel bad when I hurt people's feelings, but at the end of the day, they know exactly how I feel. You know?
And that's something that, again, with both of you guys, is a similarity that I have looked to and has been inspiring to me. Is like, I don't think, again, from this is the outside perspective, this is why I love having these conversations to like get to like, all right, what is actually going on in your head? Because it doesn't feel like either of you care what other people, the way that you carry yourself. Because it's like, dude, you're both you. And that's what an identity, I've been reading about this too lately, is like, you're a different person to every single person that you know. Everybody has a different experience with you. So Mike Lenge is a collection of what every single person thinks about him on the outside, but really Mike Lenge is Mike Lenge, and only Mike Lenge knows that, who that person is.
Right.
And like how, I guess, Aston, like how do you process that? How do you think about that? Because do you think about it? Because if you do, you do a hell of a job.
I try not to, at least. I think that like ultimately from like a positivity standpoint, it's like when I do have like negative thoughts, it's more or less like when I'm tired, I would say. Like I would associate it more with me just being like worn down. Like I know sometimes we practice at night, right? I work a full-time job. I'm not a teacher. I go to practice, and there's every single practice, I just know as I'm driving there, I'm like, something occurred today that I'm going to have to deal with when I get into practice. Like something that I don't want to deal with. And I might not be in a good mood, but like your energy rubs off on everyone around you. And it's so, like I was just saying, like it's infectious. Like whether you're positive or you're negative, like it's going to affect the people around you. So it's more or less just like being able to just like, for like the mental toughness side, just like be able to be like, all right, well, like too bad that you don't feel good, like feel better type of thing.
Yeah.
And like these kids don't care that you had a rough day at work ultimately. So tough shit. Like,
Yeah.
like I don't know. Like unfortunately I don't have a good answer to that. I think it just compounded on like how I live my life, like how I've kind of like, it's my personality.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you say it exactly how you did, like tough shit, because to your point, like we don't think about it, but I feel like it kind of has a lot to do with parenting. Yeah, I almost heard your dad when you just said tough shit. You know, like I can hear John White saying, "Well, tough shit, Aston." You know? It's like that's also a lot to do with it. It's like my mom is one of the most positive people you'll ever meet. You know. And my dad has this stone face where everyone thinks like he hates them. It's like, no, you got to get to know him.
Yeah.
But that balance, like, I feel like Aston probably gets a lot of that too. Like, and we all know each other's parents. I think that has a lot to do with it too. It's like that constant, like, when we grew up, like, what was there to be worried about, or how many bad days realistically were there?
Yeah.
And that's part of the, I think, problem is now that we're in our almost 30s is like people are dealing with real shit. And when we were growing up, we didn't have hard times.
Yeah.
You know, and if there were hard times, it was like incidental things that it's like, all right, that is out of your control.
And I think, I mean, I guess just, personal perspective, and what I think is coming out in the world today is that people did have hard times. Again, they just didn't deal with them because it was tough shit.
Right.
So you couldn't acknowledge. And that's again, the interesting part of like wrestlers and this whole thing, mental health but I was so excited because it's like, this is different. This is mental toughness where it's, there's different ways to go about it. And everybody has their own way. And clearly your guys' way has led you to the most positive, upbeat, uplifting, inspiring people that I know. So like,
Yeah.
I always say there's only two ways to go about these things. It's to feel them or to numb them. And numb, has a negative connotation, but like mental toughness and numbing, it could be like the same thing. Instead of numbing with drugs, you're just numbing with the fact that like, no, there's more ahead that I have to be ready for. Aston, like you're saying, like the kids don't care.
Yeah. Also, like from a mental toughness and like wrestling perspective, like it helps you understand like at a young age, like in high school where like real things are occurring or like tough situations occurring, you might not know how to deal with them. Like wrestling presents those to you like at face value. Like if you wrestle, you're going to go through tough situations. You're going to get your ass kicked. It humbles you. That's just the nature of the sport, right?
Yeah.
So I think that just by going through the process of it, like if you wrestle long enough, you're gonna get beat up, and that's humbling. Like no one wants to get beat up, right? But guess what? Like you just got beat up, and there's nothing you could do about it.
Yeah.
And everyone was watching.
Everyone was watching.
It's not like you got jumped and like, wow, that dude kicked my ass. Thank God nobody saw that.
Yeah.
It's like there was a gym full of people, strangers, your family, your girlfriend.
Half the people were clapping.
Yeah, there's that part too.
Yeah.
And to your point about like the matches like that we used to go to, the environment, like again, it really can't be replicated. To your point, like there's people clapping when there's a 16-year-old kid getting their ass kicked.
Yeah.
You know, like you're getting your face rubbed in the mat, you're getting tech falled, you're getting embarrassed, whatever it is. And there's like half the room is people like rooting about it.
And dude, also like this is from an outside wrestler's perspective, because like I think, body, like I've had my own body issues or just like growing up and like kids go like, dude, you're also just in like
a leotard.
Yeah, that just makes like you're all out there physically, like as a fucking kid. And I'm just like, dude, like even that part, like I think that all these things, they sound silly, but like it actually does something to you to be comfortable in your own skin because you were literally pretty much in it. Like, I mean, your whole life. And like also another point to the wrestling side of things, and I think this is something with individual sports. And I'm trying to think of how else this could be, not in a sport way, but like 1v1. I mean, sales, it could be the kind of the same things. Like you win the deal, you lose the deal, but there's like nuance there. Like, oh, well, there could be factors like wrestling, swimming, like you got beat. That's it. Like it was one-on-one. That guy was better than you. Lacrosse could be like, oh, well, like I was open and they didn't pat, like you can always explain away your failure. And wrestling, you can't.
No, it's transparent. You lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you can't blame anybody else. And I think that's where it comes down to like growing up and having the understanding of like self-accountability and like taking responsibility for things, because you can't go through the sport and have success by blaming other people. Like it's not how it works. Now, with that being said, it takes a village, right? Like it's a selfish sport in nature from the standpoint of like it is you, but in order to have success, it takes a lot of people being willing to use resources on you to be successful.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a bit of a catch-22 there. Like you need to have the guys in practice that aren't varsity, right? Like you need those guys to contribute, and those guys are just as important as the guys who are winning 40 matches a year, because without them, you don't have practice partners. Like you also can't wrestle a good kid like every single day in the room, because you have to wrestle kids that are below your skill level too, to like develop what you're learning also. And I think that like translates into just like practicing your craft and whatever you're good at, right? Like eventually like you have to start small and you have to build skills, and like instant gratification is huge now, where people just want things instantly, and like good things aren't going to come that way.
Yeah.
So just like having the understanding that it takes time and you're not going to get it right away, and that's okay. But like, don't quit.
Yeah. So how do you coach your kids? How do you speak to them about that? Especially about the like, yo, you're going to lose. And like, how do you talk them through, especially in today's world where like
you don't have to tell them that they're going to lose.
Yeah.
They'll experience that on their own.
Yeah.
Right. Like you also don't have to talk about the result either. Like, it's not about winning and losing, right? So if you make it about that, then that's what they're worried about rather than like the process of it, right? Like, ultimately what I realized through the sport and like in my professional life is that it's the results don't matter and you can't control the results. So don't worry about it, right? Like, focus on the process, focus on what you can do to get better and continue to get better. And hopefully you enjoy what you're doing too. And if you do enjoy what you're doing, you're going to get better at it quicker. But just talk to them about like the fact that it's okay to fail. It's okay to try new things. Like, matches are feedback for you. Like, it's not the end all be all. Your parents still love you. You're going to go home and everything's like the sun's going to come up tomorrow, right? It's like, try to take the pressure off of it from that standpoint, because kids know that they win and they lose. Kids that are 6 years old know if they win and if they lose. You don't have to tell them.
Yeah.
And like, just understanding that like if they are like upset, it's like you can't feel sorry for yourself. Like, that's the worst thing you can do because no one else feels sorry for you.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's where it ties into the whole mental toughness side of it too. It's like, all right, like you lost, like who cares?
Yeah.
Right. Like no one else cares that you lost. Like, get the next best thing.
I would imagine that that wrestling, again, obviously since we've been in high school, culture has changed so much. The culture of parents, the culture of, again, like people, and it's just like, you know, I don't know if we're real enough anymore, especially from like a parent's perspective, from what I've seen as a referee of just seeing these, like, it's like, dude, this is not, like you said, it's not about winning and losing. Like, well, tell that to a Long Island lacrosse parent, because it's all about winning and losing. And it's all about, and also not only winning and losing, it's about their kid scoring a goal. It's not even about the team. It's about the individual on a team sport. So that gets messed up. But I would imagine that wrestling culture perhaps has stayed a little bit closer to reality because of the nature of the sport. So you just, all right, sweet. Now I want to hear about it.
Well, I think I can't speak for everybody in the room, but my parents, like, critical to a healthy degree, where it was more so like, be self-aware. Like, I think that self-awareness thing is huge. And I think it, like we're alluding to it with all the wrestling talk without saying what it is the self-awareness factor, where it's like the self-accountability, it falls under the same umbrella, but it's like just being self-aware that, like, all right, I'm seeded 6th out of a 30-man bracket. So like, you're supposed to be the 6th best guy in the bracket. Like, that might be good, but it's like, there's still 5 guys who are supposed to beat you. You know what I mean? And it's like, going into that tournament, it's like, all right, it's on me, like, to do better than whatever you're seeded as. But like, the effort factor, like, I think, again, all of our parents were kind of the same way. They're not mad at you if you lose. They're not mad at you if you got beat up. They're mad at you if you like didn't go out there and like give it 100%.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, dude, what the fuck was that? Like, and my dad would say it just like that, like talking to me like almost like I was an adult. And at a young age, I don't think that that's unhealthy.
Yeah.
I think people view it as almost unhealthy, and it's healthy to an extent. You can't be the one who, all right, 2 hours later, you're still like grilling your kid, not talking to them at dinner or something. Like that.
Yeah.
So I know I have friends, and I don't want to like call out their parents, but like,
they know
their dad wouldn't talk to them.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like, that's not healthy. But it is healthy on the ride home to be like, yeah, there was like 2 times during that game, like, you clearly weren't giving it your all.
Yeah.
What was that?
It's funny. I still remember on the turf at O&J, and like, this is like youth lacrosse. My mom, and we never like talked, she didn't care. Like, not she cared about me having a good time and me like just, you know, again, working hard, being out there. But like, and I worked hard. Like, you know, I played hard, but like one time I'll never forget, she was like, you didn't hustle on like the ride that one time. And I was just like, damn. You know, but that's like, that was the extent of with her. And I agree, the parenting thing is so important. I want to like blow up this discussion because there's a lot to talk about here. But like, personal experiences, such, in my opinion, cool memories with my dad after my dad coached all, you know, probably all of us, and coached all through youth lacrosse. Every ride on the way home, and this is why I'm such like an analytical person of like, and again, self-aware, like constantly think of these things. We'd go home and we would each give me a grade 1 to 10 on, and you guys know my dad, so it's like even funnier, but like 1 to 10 on how I played that day, 3 things I could have done better, and or 3 things to work on, could have done better, and 3 things I did well. So like, not only, you know, it wasn't, it was very adult, like you said, like your dad talking to you like an adult. It made me from like U11, I'm talking like my entire lacrosse career. And it was beautiful. I mean, I'll never forget those conversations, but it gave me a level of awareness that was like, oh yeah, I might've had, 3 goals, couple points, like whatever it is. But yeah, I didn't hustle, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. And it's like not a bad thing to look at yourself in the mirror and be like,
no, it's not. But
Critical.
I think also it's important that you are able to like teach your child that like that's okay to like have those conversations, because if your kid's not willing to have the conversation, then they're just going to resent you for it.
yeah,
Right. So like I'm not a parent, obviously, and like I don't know how that would work, but like you have to teach them just like you teach anything else, that like this is like I'm doing this because of I want to be able to help you if you care about getting better. If you don't care about getting better or improving, then they're not going to be receptive to it. Right. So there's like a catch-22 there. Like in order for it to be productive, the child has to be receptive of it.
yeah. So you nodded your head no when I said that like wrestling's probably stayed closer to that culture. So like I'm interested in like why and how, again, like what is, because again, I mean, phones, like you said, I always tell the story of like, dude, I played lacrosse. There were parents emailing coaches, you know what I mean? And like I'm friends with many coaches that are like, dude, to deal with the parents is crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, yo, it's like this is and again, I mean, you might get paid a little bit of money, but like nobody that's coaching is really getting paid worth their while. Like, what their time is for.
Sure.
It's like you're going out you're like going way out of your way to like literally care about these kids. And also in a way, you said you're not a parent, but dude, all those kids look up to you,
Yeah, but it's in a different capacity.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like I think we all view our coaches different than we view our parents.
Sure.
The one thing that's different about wrestling and other sports is that the results speak for themselves in a certain way. So like you can email a coach, but it's like, why is my son not wrestling varsity? Well, he didn't win the wrestle off. Like it's self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Like, there's no Johnny missed a free throw.
It's the beauty
Right?
of it, though. It's the beauty
and
of
it's the
it.
same with like getting recruited for college. It's like, well, like, and that's the beauty of being from Pennsylvania. It's that, like, you don't even need to wrestle on a club team. Like if you place at the Pennsylvania State tournament, like you're gonna get recruited.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like it certainly helps, like the more exposure you have, right? But that's the difference. Like the reason why I shook my head no is because there are some parents who you can tell are just like living vicariously through their children, and their children are having success. And there's parents that like I don't know them personally, but are picking their kid up and moving them across the country every year to like a different private school.
Yeah.
To like get different training. And it's like ultimately like I think it takes away from like wrestling and like the pureness of it. Where it's like, why are you doing like does your kid really want to do that? Like do they want to go to a different high school every year? I mean, I liked high school. Like I would not like I wasn't good enough to like do that, but I wouldn't want to leave to wrestle somewhere else. Like that was me personally. So like I don't want to tell anyone like what to do with their kids, and like I think it's fine if you go to a private school and you live close to it, but I think it's crazy that you're uprooting your family and moving every year.
But it speaks to the general topic of like how different people's realities are and like the culture you're raised in. Like and again, one of the things that I like think we can all relate to in the room is like you said, your dad coached us all on lacrosse. Your dad coached me in wrestling. Like my dad was always around for sports. So like we're obviously very fortunate to be in a position like that where your parents live these like lifestyles where they can do that. So you don't take it for granted, but it gets you where you are in life, And I think talking to kids like an adult, and again, I don't have kids either, but like the way I view like talking to young people when I see them in places that I enjoy, like golf or sports, you try to talk to them like an adult from your perspective and be like, look, dude, like, especially at the golf course, I always think about it. I know I played every sport growing up, played a little bit of golf. Now it's the only sport I'm playing other than like rec stuff. And I look at these kids on the golf course. I'm like, I know you're playing 3 other sports and I know like golf is nerdy to you, but I'm like, put the time in and this is like forever rewarding, Kind of like jumped around on tangents, but like the parenting thing, I just keep like falling back to that, is like, we just have the support system of coaches, our friends' parents who are always present.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has a lot to do with our success in everything, but it's also like how we shape how we view things.
Yeah.
You know, and there's kids who are less fortunate, and Aston and I can both like name the kids whose parents weren't at the matches, you know? And if we remember that,
Yeah.
you don't think that those kids remember that,
Yeah.
you know? And to your point about moving your kids all over the country, wrestling in my memory is the only sport where the parents were holding kids back in middle school so they could be a 14 or 15-year-old freshman. And then doing the post-grad years was common in other sports. But when you think about like the toll that wrestling has on your body, and if you're taking it as a full year sport, like full-time sport, I don't think it's the healthiest. Like, I think we all played multiple sports growing up. I think that's, again, something that needs to be like focused on, is like,
Yeah.
when we were growing up, very few and far between did any of our friends only play one sport.
Yeah.
And their parents be down their throat about it. Now it's the norm.
And it was detrimental to, cause like I grew up playing baseball, soccer, doing all the, at a very young age, but I stopped and just played lacrosse, played 1 year freshman football. My mom always, she literally still makes jokes about it. She's like, I never had to wash your pants. Like she's like, you were never making tackles. Like I was like, dude, like Matt has a video of me. I don't know if you ever saw it. I remember we'd watch it in your basement. Has a video of me literally making a block, like running backs. Like there's a blocker in front, and I clearly go cut out of my way to go hit the blocker, just like with a little shoulder bump, so I didn't have to actually like hit the ground, get tackled. But it was terrible. I would have been such a better, athlete just in general. And that's the other thing. It's like, dude, like you go play soccer, you wrestle, like again, coming into the season, like you're already in tip top shape.
Right.
It puts you that much further ahead. But
I think we, again, in the pre-notes, like we kind of talked about it, like the learning to fail at a young age, learning to not be the best dude on the court, the best dude on the field, the best person on the mat, whatever it may be. It's like, and wrestling, again, the results are so cut and dry. It's so straightforward. Like I went out there and wrestled this dude, he beat my ass. Like couldn't get more real than that. But playing those other sports and knowing like, all right, I'm probably not going to be able to play at the high school level on a varsity team, but I'm glad I played basketball when I was ages 6 to 10.
Yeah.
Because it taught me like I'm a role player.
Yeah.
You're not always going to be the captain or like the star on the court.
Yeah.
Again, I think those lessons are way more important than being the best kid on the field, because that's easy. Because you wouldn't be there if it wasn't like you didn't already have the ability.
Yeah, I agree with that also. I think that sometimes that gets overlooked, where it's like parents want their kids to be like the superstar, like the absolute best. But like if you're talking about winning the game of life also, it's like I think sometimes it's better to be the kid that's like the best teammate, right? Because like if you're the best teammate and like you might not be the superstar, but you like people want to be around you, people want to play with you because you're helping them out constantly, like that teaches good just like personal skills, right? And like if you are involved in games throughout your entire life and like you have the ability to continue to participate, like that is way more productive, and you're going to have much more success by being the person that people want to invite to things and want to engage with, rather than just being the best.
Yeah.
Like eventually like the best, like just because you're the best at a sport, like eventually that's going to be done.
Yeah.
Right. And then what are you left with?
And people don't forget. That's the thing. It's like people do not forget how you were as a high school kid. And there's still people to this day. I actually was just at a wedding this weekend. Good friend. Saw a girl that I treated poorly as a middle school kid, probably a high school kid. And I apologized. I was like, look, like I'm terribly sorry that I, was a rugrat of a kid. And like, I hurt you and I hurt your feelings. Like, dude, it still sat with her for sure till this day.
Oh, yeah.
100%. And I'm like, damn, bro, I have done nothing, but
Yeah.
I'm not saying I've done nothing. I've done nothing but like try to, again, like work, grow, change, do all these things. And you can do, I've done 10 years of work and it still won't matter. And it might not. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but people just don't forget.
No.
Yeah. Were you saying that you were the best at something and that's why people...
No.
Being a good teammate, being a good teammate is so like important. I think again, to your point, like it's something that never goes away. Like in all aspects of life, you're on a board, a committee, a team at work. Like being a good teammate is something that like literally it never goes away. Like,
Yeah.
it's a part of your life.
And that's why they also say, I mean, relating a lot of this to the corporate world, work life, like they also say never to leave a place poorly. Yeah. And I've done that too. I'm like, damn, like again, same thing. Like you'll never be able to change that perspective and like people, you know, which isn't a bad thing. I think it's like, again, like I try to talk about this and be open because it's like, I'm trying to learn from it. And I think you have to acknowledge back to self-awareness of like, okay, well, yeah, you know,
It's something to be conscious of. Like I like to say that relationships are the currency of life. It's
Nice.
like the most important thing we have ultimately, like at the end of the day, like, so I think that like keeping in perspective, like no matter where you are, like wherever your feet are currently, like take advantage of the relationships around you and like try to be good, right?
Yeah.
Like try to make sure that you don't leave on a bad note, whatever it is. Because like we're in a society now where it's like everyone's chasing the next best thing too. So like, and everyone's so quick to jump ship and move on and whatnot, which is fine. I think that there's positives to with that also. Like it's not necessarily quitting or giving up. It's just taking advantage of opportunities. I think people are scared to take advantage of opportunities too. But yeah, I think that that's just something that like, I like meeting people. Like I like being around people. I think that that's what you're saying about like my personality. It's like, I don't really care what people necessarily think, but like I just like chopping it up and meeting new people too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And we don't, I mean, the older we get and probably until you have kids, you know, those opportunities aren't as plentiful because then you're meeting parents of kids, like you're back into a whole nother culture. And like, I guess last episode, Dan said, he's like, oh, you just move on to the next kingdom and then you play the same game. And like, you just like do it again and again.
It is funny with like the relationships. I like the currency comment, but it's like going back to the whole sports thing. Like again, something that you're not talking to your 8-year-old kid and telling them, hey, one day you never know, like you could be working for one of your friend's dads that you met in a sport that you're not even going to play through high school, you know? And it's like, again, in hindsight, again, you don't talk to your kid that way. But now I'm like thinking about how I network for work. And it's like every single name that I bring up are like, I met through baseball, lacrosse, wrestling, football, all these things that if I wasn't so active as a kid, I wouldn't have known any of these people.
Yeah.
So it's just funny how like that, again, it's not why you're doing it, but in hindsight, it's like, it's a great thing to potentially bring up as a point to talk about with your kids. It's like, and that's, when you think about private schools and things like that, that's another thing that always cracks me up is, to Aston's point, people are constantly chasing whatever's going to put their kids in the best position to get to the next level. And I think a lot of it gets lost in translation of like, the real reason why like immigrants come to this country and try to put their kids in the best school. It's like, it's to get them the best schooling. It's not so they can get the best scholarship for sports at some school.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, no, it's take pride, you know,
Yeah.
rather than just trying to put all the pressure on the kid.
Yeah. And it's funny, I really enjoyed your guys' feedback to the pre-notes, and especially the point about like parents, and not only your parents, but also the parents around us. Because again, doing what I'm doing here, Mark's dad is the first one who said, stop telling people that you're going to do it and say that you do it. And he's been with me ever since, providing support, help, keeping me going. Like he, again, I send this newsletter out. There's a little over 100 people, but he was the first one. Mm-hmm. Like, dude, like I wouldn't be here without him. You know what I mean? And like, that's the things that you don't think about when I always joke about like you're, at the summer, I mean, we played summer lacrosse, club lacrosse together. When you're under the tent and you're saying hello to these people, like one thing that I'm so grateful for my parents for is like, they're like, shake their hand, look them in the eye, have a conversation. And like, again, that's something, and again, credit to our parents for teaching all of us is having adult conversations. Cause I mean, Aston, you definitely don't shy away from any, or never did as a kid. I mean, I remember we'd be at these family parties, like different parties that like, dude, we wouldn't even talk to kids our age. We'd be with all the adults the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just like me being curious. Like I always am trying to learn and like just not like for like any reason in particular other than just like I just enjoy learning from people ultimately. And like I've always had that curiosity, which is probably what I do now for work, right? Like my job is to read people and build relationships ultimately, because that's what it comes down to. So yeah, but like also like you have to be who you are. Like if you're trying to be someone else, like I'm pretty good at reading people like personally, and like my BS alarm will go off like immediately.
Yeah.
Not like people are coming and asking me for advice on a regular basis or anything, but like you know what I mean. It's like if you are genuine to like who you are, and if you continue to be genuine, and like I try like for better or for worse, like you said, just like be who I am, and like if people aren't receptive to that, then I probably won't get along with them anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So like you take it and you move on, and I think with like networking from a professional standpoint, that's huge, because like if you're working with someone, like I'm gonna talk to people I work with in a professional manner, but also as a person.
Yeah.
Like I don't care what your title is.
Yeah.
I think that stemmed from like us just being exposed to like a lot of impactful adults at a young age. Like we were very fortunate to have that. So like my perception is just like this person is a normal person. I'm going to talk to them like a normal person. If they want to be talked to like they're better, then like we're probably not going to get along.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's fine. There's a lot of people out there.
It's huge in the professional world too. It's like showing that level of respect, but also not shying away from a conversation because of somebody's status. To your point, I think like being exposed to adults that talk to you like an adult while you're still young is like super important. From that perspective, it's like you were able to show that level of respect, like you said, shake their hand, how are you doing, make eye contact. Like even when I'm like walking my dog around my neighborhood, anybody under 16 years old, they're like head down, trying to avoid even just acknowledging you to say hi.
Yeah.
And our parents would never let us get away with that. Like my mom still brings it up as a teacher. She's like, I walk around the hallways trying to say hello, how are you to every single kid. And I've gotten to the point where I have to thank the ones who actually say it back because there's so few of them. Yeah. And just acknowledging like you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. I make the joke in this building, and this is actually, I've talked to other people that I've met in the city that actually have said the same thing. This is a pretty like, young building, like people all, around late 20s, early 30s. And I make the joke, like nobody talks to each other in the elevators. Nobody looks at each other. Nobody, and I've tried to consciously be like, all right, I understand that, like, again, like we're all apes. We're all just copying each other. So like when 3 people in the elevator, one person pulls out their phone, it'll take 1 second for the other 2 people to pull out their phone.
Yeah.
So I try to stuff my hands in my pockets and just like either try to make eye contact first. And then obviously, a lot of times that doesn't work out, but I've had to consciously do that. And I only, if you guys remember Jake Scott, that I played lacrosse with growing up, he actually has a podcast and he talked about that, and he's a teacher. And he said that, he was walking around with his headphones in and he realized that he's like, wait, I'm not being accessible to these kids that I'm teaching. Even if it is like, my early morning walk to class where I might just see one person, but they might not say hello just because they think, I've got my headphones in, I don't want to say hello. And he's like, hearing that made me think like, oh wait, I got to change my behavior. And but yeah, this building, nobody really says hello. And I said like the only time that people started like looking up and saying stuff to each other was when Philly like ran out of water and everybody was carrying gallons of water and everybody was like, that, yeah. Yo, no water here. Like, yeah, like how are you, neighbor? Like,
but to your point, that like struggle brings everyone together, or if like you're all sharing the same experience.
Yeah.
Like that's how sports are too. But like things like that are a prime example where it's like, when needed, everyone actually has social skills.
Yeah.
But to your point, being more conscious about it always helps.
It's a comfort thing. Like people are more comfortable staying to themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's something that like, unfortunately in our society, like where it's moving, it's like, it's so much more accessible to be comfortable without interacting with other people. which I don't necessarily think is a good thing.
Yeah.
Not that I have any like science to back that, but I think that us as humans, we need interaction. Like we're social beings, right? Yeah, I think it's becoming easier for people to be less social and be more reserved and keep to themselves and not interact with other humans, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing. I think we're social creatures and we need human interaction. And the more and more that you are isolating yourself or like staying to yourself, the more comfortable you'll become in that. And I think comfort is also a scary thing too, where it's like, it becomes almost a drug and it's hard to break to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what we're seeing as a whole, like in the culture, where it's like people like more and more just like floating through life without purpose. I don't know if that's due to like the pandemic recently and having to be by themselves, but I feel like there's just, and this is just my personal opinion, that there's just more of it. Like, and I think that like as human beings, like you need purpose. Like you need to wake up every day with the ambition to accomplish something.
Yeah.
And that's human nature.
And it's funny, but and this is another thing that I'm trying to like, I guess like I'm not like theorize on, or just like, I don't even know if that's a word, but like we're getting detached from the physical world.
Yeah.
Second by second, and people don't realize it. Like, look at your screen time, 8 hours a day on your phone. You're living, people talk about the metaverse and it's a joke, but like we're already in a digital metaverse. You have a digital life and you have a physical life, and we're getting detached every second because there's another thing that I just like, all right, like however many years ago, you used to be able to just go for a walk. And that was all you could do when you were on your walk. Then you could go for a walk and call your mom with a, you know, with the bag cell phone. Then BlackBerry, you could text, call, walk. Now you can walk, text, call, surf the internet, post a picture, Google, listen to a podcast in Africa, in Europe. Like you can, yeah, get people creating digital avatars. Like there's so many things that you can do at once now that like we're like, it's not, we're not living in the physical world as much as we are. And yeah, I mean, it's, I don't have any, I haven't finished like my full thoughts on it. So I can't figure out like what, but like it's going to like either fully detach at some point, or some people already have fully detached, you know, the people that like, and that's, again, that's why I think we have a lot of these mental health issues, is because we're living in a different world.
I agree. And like from like a mental health perspective, for kids nowadays too, like it's almost not fair to them because they haven't lived life without it. So like we can't even, and like I don't even know where to go with this, but I'll just like state my thoughts. Like how are we parenting these kids when we don't have any idea of what they're going through?
Yes.
Like, nobody
Wow.
knows, right? Like, so how can someone, like before we had roadmaps to things, it's like, okay, like this is how you did things, like this is your experience. But now it's like no one's experiencing what they are.
Yeah.
So how it's honestly like social media is a drug. Like I wouldn't be surprised like big tobacco or whatever it is, like that, like those commercials where it's like there's going to be like big social media where like, that's going to be the next thing that we regulate.
And it's already
as a society, because it's just it's getting out of control. And another narrative that I think is false, and this is just from like my small sample size of like the high school kids that I'm around, it's like kids are soft nowadays, or like they don't have the work ethic that our parents did. Like I don't think that that's necessarily true. Like I have kids that work just as harder than I did, and I'm sure just as hard as what our parents did, but they just have more distractions.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't work hard. It's not that they are soft. It's that they just have so much on the tip of their fingers all the time that they just have so much more accessibility. It's just different.
Yeah. And it's so funny, dude, again, back to the detached from reality. I think that's another thing that parents these days, adults these days, are detached from the reality of what kids are actually like. And that's why I like to, you know, talk to you about it, about how are these kids actually, because dude, I meet kids, like a lot of my like family members or, you know, friends, family members that are like these young kids, dude, these kids are great kids. Like, yes, but there's all these viral videos of kids smashing windows and like, yeah, there's going, but like that negative is in adults' face so much more. So like I think that we think that these bad kids, and yeah, you only hear about the bad, but like, dude, the most part, a lot of good kids. And then also to your point about, we don't have a roadmap and what do we teach? And I think that's, in the future, in the next 10 years, 20 years, when I become a dad, like you can literally only rely on what we've always been able to rely on, which is like love people, love yourself, treat people with respect. And just like, there's only so many core principles that are going to stay because the world that they're living in isn't the world that we lived in. And it's changing like every 3 years now.
Yeah.
The instant gratification aspect is like the one thing where it's like, when we were trying to create happiness for ourselves as kids, it was a much more simple world, I feel like, where now it's like the comparing yourself to others. You didn't have the capacity to do that you do today as a kid, because you used to just grow up in these little realities, these mini realities, whatever your neighborhood was, whatever sports you were playing, that was your reality, not someone across the country or across the world going from resort to resort. Like, you didn't have that expectation. If your parents didn't go on a vacation out of the country, you didn't know what that looked like, what that felt like, anything like that. Now you can put yourself there through the screen of social media, and that creates, again, all these different anxieties, all these different self-perception type of issues that, again, we never had to worry about. And we started with the word anxiety, like at the very beginning. The word anxiety was never thrown around in my world until I was a teenager, probably realistically. So like, you didn't know what it even meant. It couldn't have been a thought in your head because you didn't know the definition of it. Yeah. Now it's like, it's in everybody's face. So to your point, like, not necessarily at the beginning, we were talking about it, like not acknowledging it for anxiety, like, because you couldn't. Yeah, you didn't even know. You were just nervous about whatever it was, or anxious, but you didn't know what that meant. And I think, and as we talked about it a bit probably before we were recording about, therapy, reliving things, it's like now even talking through my own stuff, like you're going back. And I always say, like, looking at this, childhood with adult eyes, like, again, like it's trying to detach. And I always say, like, and I admittedly, like, I'm always like, I connect so many dots that probably aren't supposed to be connected, but I've also connected so many dots that have made things make sense. So it's hard to get away from. And I think there's nuance to, when I actually made a point, I was in this like little like social club that I go to down here in the city. And I was lucky enough to be like invited to this like mentorship, diversity training, or not diversity training. I don't want to say that, but like it was seminar. It was actually just naturally, it was an open conversation, but it was a very diverse. There was about 15, like, probably 25 to 35, year old people. And I was like, of the 15 people, I was one of 2 white guys in the room. And from where we grew up, when does that ever happen? Like, it doesn't. And the topic of diversity came up, and then they were talking about, where all this money goes, like how, and the point that I like made and had discussions with people after is like, how are you supposed to learn about diversity when you don't have it where you grow up? And the same thing that you're saying about like anxiety, like you didn't even know these things. So like, how am I supposed to be respectful? Not how am I? Cause like, again, talk about just love everybody, but like, I want to be able to empathize with people. It's like, well, they didn't have life experiences. I have a friend that grew up and they're like, yeah, I grew up and I was, my dad owned a restaurant and I was in the kitchen and there was all different cultures. So like, I didn't even think about, this cause I was exposed to it. But when you're not exposed to it,
so with that being said, I don't think you have to understand to empathize also. Like, you don't have to have certain experiences to empathize with like what someone else has gone through. It's like just having the perspective of like, the worst thing that ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Right. So like, you can't necessarily, and it might not have been that bad, but to someone, like, that's the worst thing that's ever happened to them, so it's bad. Yeah. Right? And there's some kid that's in Africa that doesn't have shoes. Yeah. Right? And like they're grateful for the fact that they get to eat. So with having that perspective, it's like, you don't have to be there. Like you don't have to have been there before to understand. But just understanding that everyone's perception is different. Yeah. Right. And you only know what you know, like you're saying. Yeah. I read something online the other day that was like, and that's definitely an old school perspective. Like, everybody, there's always somebody out there that has it worse. And it's like, can you imagine saying the opposite to somebody who had like, a big promotion, their best day ever. And like, well, there's somebody who has it better.
It's like, well, like it doesn't, until you like, again, your best day ever is your best day ever.
Right.
So it means, it feels and
Yeah. I look at it from the other perspective though as well. It's like, if you do accomplish something personally, like if I accomplish something which other people might think is amazing, but to me it's just part of the process. Like you can't be so involved with what you've accomplished, because ultimately, like, what does it matter, right? Like it's just part of what you're doing.
yeah.
If you keep it in that perspective, it just like I don't know, it makes it not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like I don't make it a big deal because it's not. It's just part of whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
And to other people from the outside looking in, it might be like, wow, like I could never imagine doing that, right? Depending on where they are. And there's other people that are like, that's like great, like you really didn't accomplish anything. So like just keeping it in perspective, like take it as it is and move on.
Yeah. Dude, that's why people like, I've obviously enjoy talking about what I'm doing here. And like that, one of the things I've said is like, these conversations are helping me so much, because just the way that you're saying, like that grounds me in what I'm doing here. And like, again, you're like, no, it's just like part of it's what you do. It doesn't have to be who you are. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to look at yourself that way. And that's something that, I think a lot of people struggle with, because I've struggled with, is identifying with the accomplishments or the title.
And that's where wrestling, if we want to tie this back into the sport of wrestling, it's different, because when you're growing up and you're wrestling, and let's just say you're wrestling in high school, there is no multi-million-dollar contract at the end of the line. Like you're not playing basketball, you're not playing football, there is no league. You're not doing it. Like the most that you can get is a college scholarship, which at that point, even the best of the best don't even get full rides anymore. Now with the NIL, it's different. We're not going down that route. Like back when we were in high school, like we wrestled because it was the joy of it. Like we enjoyed competing. We enjoyed going to practice. Not saying I enjoyed every second of it. There were days where I did not want to go to practice. I wanted to go home. I wanted to sleep. But in perspective, that's the pureness of the sport, right? Like you're doing it because there is no end. Like, and that's where, like, if you're using it as a means to an end, you're doing it for the wrong reason. And I didn't realize that in the time when I was competing, and I'm sure Mike is similar. Like I was doing it because I wanted to achieve accolades in the sport. Like I was making sacrifices to achieve actual physical accolades. That's what I cared about.
Yeah.
Right? Now my perception's obviously different. And that's why I try to portray my perspective now and not make it about accolades. But it's like, why did I cut so much weight? Why did I work out twice a day? Why did we wake up at 6:30 and run before school started, before it was dark out, no one else was there besides us, right? You do it because you love the sport and you want to be great at something that is not going to take you in a professional standpoint.
Yeah. No, I going back a few steps in the conversation, I think in terms of like triggers, like what triggers different emotions, different levels of anxiety, different levels of anxiousness, and what mental health is or means to different people is all different things. Your guys' point of like your worst day ever, your best day ever. I think like you talk about like the stigma around mental health, specifically men's mental health, is like, it isn't a straightforward science where it's biology or something like that, where two things come together and created a new chemical. There's different levels of trauma. There's different levels of things that trigger different anxieties. And again, before you knew what the word anxiety was, you just kind of had that anxious feeling. And now the fact that it's talked about so much, obviously it's good to be able to talk through things in a room like this, but I also think it creates this world where you can use it almost as a cop-out in terms of like, this gives me so much anxiety. Like in the Italian family, like growing up, it's like agita. Like you say, I catch myself, my girlfriend calls me out all the time. She's like, you say everything gives you agita. And I was like, honestly, that's my way of not saying I have anxiety.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this gives me agita.
And what does agita mean?
Agita. It's like basically like the Italian slang for anxiety.
Okay.
So like,
Agitated.
yeah, like, oh, this is getting me all
Oh,
worked
okay.
up. This is getting me all tight, you know? But I think, like, again, like the stigma, it's like, to some people, their trigger might be as something as simple as public speaking. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. Like, we jump in something like this, it's like, this is fun, you know? For some people, it could give you so much anxiousness. In the professional world, you sit next to these people in the office or whatever, and you hear the way that they anticipate stuff and they let it work them up. And you try to like help them cope with it, but it makes you realize it's like, look, my brain just does not operate the same way yours does. I can just tell, like, because you're just letting this become such a big deal. So everyone's coping mechanisms are different too.
Yeah. And like you said, the same way, like it's funny so I've had 5 conversations, you know, this is the 5th conversation. That's what I've learned like really quickly is like every single person is dealing with different things in different ways. And there's not like one right way or wrong way. Like I've thought about this and I try my like hardest to like stay away from like advice because I can only say to my experience. And like, that's what I'll share through this. But like what you said about triggers, like I read something about how, and this is a shame and I've now stopped doing this, but like when people get the check and go to tip 20%, my dad taught me since we were like 5, move the decimal point times 2. Mm-hmm. It's not that hard. Like I've never struggled, you know, round up, like it's not, but do people, that's like a big trigger for many people because it reminds them of like childhood memories of like getting math problems wrong and being at the chalkboard and having people like getting, like I heard that from somebody's like, in kindergarten got a question wrong. And like, I'll never forget that. And that still eats at me. And I'm like, whoa, like you're saying, like, dude, like, it's like, everybody's got their different thing that like, I don't know. And that's, you know,
it could be something so small. It could be something so big. We were just at a family dinner and like our family on my mom's side is obviously going through like a traumatic scenario together. And it's a prime example in real time to me as a 30-year-old guy now that every single one of us is dealing with it a different way. Mm-hmm. But when we all get in a room together, it's almost this tension of you don't understand.
Wow.
Where like, well, no, like I do understand because I went through it too.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you cope with it.
Yeah.
Right?
And how you're feeling and how it's affecting you. And that's something that also my therapist uses like the hurricane example where it's like people go through Hurricane Katrina. One person can't sleep for the rest of their life, like can't make it through the night. Mm-hmm. One person doesn't think about it at all. One person, you know, and that's the other thing. It's like trauma lives within the body and sometimes it can get triggered in different ways and it'll come out. Some people, it'll come out in a different way 30 years later. Like people have no idea. And that's the whole thing again. Like and mental health is such I agree. Like the word is almost, and the term has almost gotten so out of hand in certain ways because it's like, it can be used as an excuse. And again, even admittedly, like I like sometimes like, oh, like I got, you know, this is what I deal with. So it's like, well, doesn't give you an excuse to be an asshole. No. Like it doesn't like, but like I almost want to, you know, hopefully eventually like just the human experience is like kind of almost like everybody's dealing with a human experience in a different way. And that could mean a collection of several different things and like, you know, mentally, physically, and kind of to bounce back Aston to where we were talking earlier about like the culture of wrestling, how it's different. And you mentioned something that was really interesting about like physically, like, you know, what these guys are going through physically together and how the culture, because it is so different. And I could still like today seeing like both of you sit here, it's still so within you. Like I'm seeing 2 wrestlers and it's like just the way that you're handling the conversation, the ease, the calmness, the balance, like it's fascinating to me, but Aston, if you could like explain a couple of the differences from your perspective.
Well, the first thing is that it teaches you that it's hard. It's very difficult and it teaches you like without you knowing at the time that life is hard. And I said this earlier, it's like no one's going to feel sorry for you. So don't feel sorry for yourself. And ultimately, like, when I meet a wrestler now who like I might have known before or I'm meeting for the first time, it's like an instant understanding of like, I understand what you went through in a way. And it's an easy way to like connect and build a connection because the wrestling world's not very big, right? So it's small, and just by having it, just like you can't put it into words, unfortunately. Like I can't explain it to you, and maybe Mike can do a better job than I'm doing, but it's just a general understanding. It's like a head nod, you know? It's like I head nod, you head nod. It's like we both know.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's like a fraternity. Like I wrestled in college, right?
Yeah.
And like part of the reason why I call it quit, but I transferred. Call it what you want. I just remember like a Friday night, we had a tournament on Saturday. I'm cutting weight. I'm in the dorms, and there's kids up at 1:00 in the morning, and I'm like if you ever cut weight, you know you are miserable. It's like the worst feeling in the entire world. You're agitated. You can't sleep. Your mouth's dry. And there's kids running around the hallways, and it's 1:00. And we have to be up at 6 to drive 2 hours to a tournament. I'm like, why am I doing this? It's like, I literally don't care if I win. Like, I don't care. So like, why am I putting myself through this when the fun part I don't even care about anymore?
Yeah.
So that was like the realization to me. And it's like when I transferred, it's like fraternities were like a big thing. And like, I just wanted no part of it. And I think that like wrestling is like the ultimate fraternity, where it's like you pay the hefty fee.
Yeah.
Right? Like you pay the fee that's not monetary.
Yeah. And like you guys were talking about like the suffering.
Yeah. Selective suffering.
Yeah. But it's like embrace the suck. Like I play golf with this guy who's a Marine, and we were sitting out there in the rain the other day. And I was just shivering, being like the softest version of a man you could be through these conditions. And the dude was like, I love this stuff. And I'm like, why? He's like, because I know I'm having so much more fun than all these other guys, because we were playing in a competitive match, like me and him versus another 2 guys. And he's like, I've just lived through this stuff. Like, but they always used to say, like, embrace the suck. And I feel like that's a huge cultural thing with wrestling, is like, we've all been through it. One thing that's unique about wrestling at like the high school level, once you like continue on, and Aston alluded to it with the postseason, was saying like the local high schools, once you got past a certain level, a bunch of the kids drop off basically. So you would practice with the other local high schools once you got to a certain level for the individual postseason, because you wanted to wrestle people your similar weight.
Oh, interesting.
Level of talent.
Yeah.
So naturally you built this network of like, all right, as much as there's camaraderie of like, we hate Boyertown or we hate Upper Perk, those are the guys you're wrestling with as practice partners going late into the season. So like when you go into these individual tournaments, you're warming up in the later rounds of the tournaments. That's the only people who are around.
Yeah.
So naturally it elevates you. All right, wrestling's already a badass sport. We're all going through it. Even if you're the worst kid on the JV team, if you show up to every practice, you're going through the same level of physical labor. But once you get to the like upper echelon and you're good at wrestling, you're looking around, and now in the future, I think of those same kids, they're all doing well in life, you know? And at the time you're taking it for granted. It's easy to take for granted. But when I run into one of those kids, you don't ever have to ask like, oh, are you doing well? You know, they're doing well. You're like excited that, hey, we bumped into each other at a bar or whatever. It's great to see that you're still doing as well as I would have thought you would do. Yeah. You know?
I mean, the culture is fascinating, and from a social aspect, more of a respect thing. Cause I talked about it, I think on the first episode with lacrosse and Tommy, it's like, it's more of a, like, you see someone, it's like, yo, like, what up? Like but like lacrosse isn't that grind. Cause as I was saying, like lacrosse, it's almost like there's a coolness to, I don't want to say not trying, but like there's a coolness to making something look effortless. Cause it's a very like, and this is now my thoughts as like 27-year-old, but like, it's a very artsy, creative sport, lacrosse. Mm-hmm. There's so many things that you can do with your stick, your hands, your like inside, outside of the game. Like it's different, but like there's not, I mean, wrestling could be a flow state, but it's more of a car crash type. Like,
yeah, wrestling is a flow state.
Yeah.
The higher level you get in wrestling, when you're competing, it's a complete flow state. Like you don't like when you're wrestling a match, like you don't actually realize what's going on.
Really?
It's all just like natural instincts, reaction. It's like you're in a different universe.
Yeah.
When you're wrestling, you're completely detached from anything else that's going on.
Yeah.
And that is unlike any other feeling I've ever experienced in my entire life, which is unique. Like it's a complete flow state.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book. It's called The Rise of Superman. and it's about flow, basically. And it's like these superior elite level athletes and why they do the sports that they do. It's like big wave surfing, cliff jumping, like those type of sports. And super interesting because they're chasing a flow state. Like once you get to that level of adrenaline, it's a flow state. Like they're not thinking anymore.
Yeah.
They're just reacting. That's the same thing with wrestling.
Yeah, it's funny wearing these headsets it makes me think back on, to your point, the flow state in wrestling it's something that you can, now we're talking about it, I can almost feel it, is like when you have the headgear on, you really are so selective with what voices you can hear. And wrestling, again, is a unique sport in that regard, that for individual matches, you have two coaches sitting in the corner, but behind them are the 4 assistants or whatever. They're all yelling.
Yeah.
They're all yelling different shit, and you hear your mom, you hear your dad, but there's a bunch of noise in that gym. And it's almost like you're saying the flow state where you're in your brain inadvertently like selecting what you can hear.
Yeah.
And for those dual meet matches, it was crazy how, like, again, you only heard the voices of the coaches that you wanted to hear.
Yeah. It's interesting. And that's something I'm reading this book called Incognito by David Eagleman, who's this like neuroscientist that I geek out on. I just love everything that he writes. He's incredible. But that's one thing he said. If you're in a bar, like you don't realize that your head, your ears are picking up every single noise, every single conversation in the bar. Because if somebody says lenge on the other side of the bar, you pick it up. Like you're constantly hearing that. But your brain is like such a fine-tuned, efficient machine that it knows that I don't need to pay attention to any of that until I hear a certain thing. So the fact that there's all those voices and that's what you hear, again, in the flow state is a fascinating. And I haven't read enough about the flow state because I'm going to do it through meditation. Like, as I mentioned, this to me is like getting lost in the sauce. Like I'm just like, even just seeing you guys go back and forth, I'm just like I'm forgetting about all the other, things. But that's definitely something that, as we were just talking about kids too, like, unfortunately, I think kids just don't have the opportunities to get into those flow states as much anymore because they have so many distractions. Like your phone's vibrating, your watch is vibrating, your everything at all times is, half of it's being filmed.
One thing I wanted to give credit to, like Duraflo and Brilla doing a good job, and again, it helps you grow up at an earlier age, is like.
And these are your high school coaches. Did they coach you before?
Yeah,
high school?
are our high school.
No, just
coaches.
high school.
Just high school. Okay.
But Duraflo was always really big on, without calling it meditation, making us meditate after our toughest practices. And that meditation at that point in time was everyone laying on their back, doing a breathing exercise for, call it 5 minutes total. But during the breathing exercise, he's coaching you into this breathing exercise where it was all about visualization. But it was all about positivity, basically. It was like, look, we just went through the most grueling exercises, workout you could really go through. Take your mind away from that and basically compartmentalize each limb down to your fingers and toes. And it would basically be like, imagine that you're losing feeling. Like, go numb. And it was like, back then, at that time, you're like, all right, this guy's being a weirdo.
Yeah.
You'd be like,
Put me asleep.
You go to sleep. But to your point, the importance of that is, it took it for granted at the time, but if I could go through those exercises on a weekly basis now, I'd probably be in a better mental state.
Dude, that's so crazy. I want to talk to him about it and I wonder how intentional it was, because that book, really, back to David Eagleman, it's called Live Wired, right behind you. It is when you're in the flow state, your neurons are more it's called like neuroplasticity, but David Eagleman calls it live wired. Like we have these thought processes that are, so ingrained in us. And then when we get into these flow states, they allow movement. So in meditation, especially with like the Headspace app that I use, at the end of the exercise is when they do that 1 minute, like ingrain, because you're allowed to have these different things. And the fact that it was so like positive after those workouts, dude, like
and it was always before our biggest competitions, mainly.
Yeah.
So it was like, he knew like you're worn down, you're mentally like worked up. Let's break that. And again, it was a great exercise. But I think about ways that as an adult, you try to get to that. And again, it goes back to like, everyone's different. Like whatever that is for you, you need to find it and you need to hold it close, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
And for like me, I think of the examples like golf. But like relationships can even be another example. Is for some people, they hate talking to strangers. I hear feedback all the time like, oh, that guy just never stops talking. To some people that bothers the hell out of them, but it's like them looking past it. Oh, that's how he copes with it. You know, talking, like, just for some people. But like I bring up golf is because it's the prime example of that flow state that you're looking for. Is like, I'm out there, I'm not letting anything else bother me. You're being competitive with yourself, but that competitiveness is what turns your brain off to everything else.
Yeah.
Which that meditation that was the point of it, is turn your brain off, get away from everything that's bothering you, from how much you just sweat, how much you just busted your own ass, even to whatever happened earlier in the day in school or relationships. Like, he was talking you through that type of stuff while we were going through that exercise. And again, it's like, if you look back, like, that's what we should all be doing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
You know,
that's phenomenal. It's funny. I actually had thoughts. I didn't reach out, but I wanted to call him before talking to you guys. And I'm sad I didn't, but, just from the outside perspective, like, there was something so different about, like, again, wrestling in general, but that program specifically, what they did. And as you mentioned about it taking a village, and I didn't want to jump in earlier, but like, talk about a village, dude, that whole program between coaches, parents, alumni,
community,
fans, like literally us, like being that, it's like, dude,
all of our parents still party today.
Yeah.
Like, in my parents' beach house, there's pictures of his parents, the Petrocelli.
Yeah.
All the parents that we grew up wrestling with. That's who they were in gyms together for 10, 12 hours at a time.
Yeah.
So you're almost forced to get along. But no, these are like some of their lifetime friends now.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. That community is like, it's something you really can't put a price tag on.
It's a family. It comes down to, like, wrestling's just a big family.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big understanding. Like, I can't put it in any other way than just like, it's a mutual understanding.
Yeah.
I met with a guy for like business purposes like 6 months ago, and from my LinkedIn, he like knew that I coached wrestling. I didn't know who he was beforehand. We talked about wrestling for a half hour.
Yeah.
He just like picked my brain about wrestling. We didn't talk business at all. Like, that's just the way that the sport is. Like, it's a massive network, like, organically.
Yeah. The connection.
Yeah. And like, I think that's why like special forces love wrestlers. Like, there's a lot of Navy SEALs, Army, like our family friend was a Navy SEAL, Army Rangers who wrestled. There's a reason why.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to transition a wrestler into that world than it is just a regular civilian. Not that other people can't do it, right? Like, there are a lot of other people that do it. Like David Goggins, for example, like, he's probably one of the most famous Navy SEALs at this point. Like, his message is incredible. Like, anyone can do it, but I think it's just more of a simple transition. Yeah.
And again, the whole mental toughness, thought process, it's so similar. And that's the funny part, just that, like, wrestling is like, I called my uncle, all my uncles wrestled. And I called my uncle, mentioned what we were doing this weekend. And I was like, like, I don't know if you have any like questions or like thoughts just for me. And just, he actually coached at Glen Mills when he was, probably, right around your age.
Sensitive subject for me.
Yeah.
That's who knocked me out of both, like, my junior and senior year.
Yeah.
Postseason. Yeah. Those kids.
Good program.
Both from like the Pittsburgh area. It's like, I wouldn't have wrestled them if they weren't at a correctional school. So
that's funny.
Nice kids.
See, people don't forget.
Dude, didn't want to cross them.
No, people don't forget.
Beat my ass.
See, I was gonna make another point, but that's the other thing about wrestlers, dude. Like, you guys could just sit here and say that, and both of you had already said in this conversation, like, wasn't the best wrestler.
Wasn't the worst either.
Yeah. But like, worked hard and like did. And again, what you took from the experience doesn't have anything to do with how good you actually were. Yeah,
exactly. And like, that's the message that I'm like, am trying to get across through coaching.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're having fun with the sport and if you're giving maximum effort and you have a positive attitude and you come into practice every day, you're going to get better inadvertently. Right. So there's no reason to worry about accolades or rankings or whatever it is. Just like, focus on the process of it and just have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And you'll be much better off at the end.
And my personal experience with like wrestling and the leadership side of it is, I was never the best kid on the team, even close. Like, I was maybe 6th, 7th best kid on the team, but was like a 2-year captain or whatever. And honestly, like, that's a great life lesson. And again, I don't ever acknowledge it for what it really is, because I don't like look back on my own life like that. But when I catch up with Durafalo and Brilla and some of these guys, and I see them nowadays, they always bring it up. And the way that they bring it up is like, oh, like you're like literally one of the best leaders I've ever coached or whatever. And hearing that, obviously you try to stay humble and you're like, shut the hell up. No way.
Yeah.
But what they mean by that, and when they try to clarify, is like, you weren't great.
Yeah.
You know, and like I take that, I appreciate them saying that because I knew it. But that's one of the things I take away about, again, I wish I could go back and talk to myself, is the mano a mano thing about wrestling and how you're staring across the way and watching the kid you're about to wrestle warm up. Again, a great life lesson where I used to just size myself up and just almost convince myself why I wasn't going to win, you know? And it's one of those things I didn't perpetuate that outward.
Yeah.
But inside, that's how I was. And Durafalo and Brilla, because they could keep it real with me more than like a normal kid, they used to be like, dude, what is your problem?
Yeah.
Like, it's in your head, you know?
It's funny you say that, because one of the things before, when I was thinking about all this and thinking back to the experiences, again, like some of the things that we don't think about, but now a topic was coming up. I'm like, all right, trying to go back in my head and what were my memories of watching you guys wrestle? And one of the things that stuck out is like, I can see the gym. I can see exactly where we're sitting on the right side. You guys are going back, like with the next wrestlers up, like everybody, the cool thing about wrestling, the whole team's cheering on everybody. Mm-hmm. Or the whole team's cheering on the one person on the mat, but the person who's next up is getting into their zone, walking back and forth. And it's like, again, as a kid, I wasn't thinking like, oh, what's going on in his head? But now I look back and I'm like, what were you guys thinking? Like you just shared a little bit about that, but like Aston, when you're back there, like, are you convincing yourself you're the man? Are you like,
So like it would vary, right? Like I'll talk through my perspective then, I'll talk through what my perspective is now. I would get more nervous when I was wrestling a kid that wasn't as good than when I would wrestle a kid that was good.
Really?
Yes, 100%. Because there's more pressure on losing is what it would come down to. It's like,
interesting.
I can't lose to this kid because I'm ranked 10th in the state and this kid's not ranked. And if I lose and this happens, or if I'm wrestling a kid that's really good, there's no pressure.
Yeah.
Like you still get nervous, but like you're just going out and competing and you're doing your best. And if you win, that's fantastic. If you lose, no one cares.
Yeah.
Right? So I would get too nervous. I would get more nervous than what I should have been when it came to competing. I don't know why. Hindsight's 2020. If I knew what I knew now then, I probably wouldn't. But you have to convince yourself the opposite, right? And like two little things here. I would get nervous coaching, and
what are you nervous about? Sorry to jump in, but what's
like the kid's thought? Doing well. Like it would be like if I was wrestling. Yeah. Like I want them to win. Like I wanted to win when I competed.
Yeah.
Like in the postseason, right? Like when it really matters. You, like for example, like here's a great example, and this is what changed my mindset completely. I didn't realize that like what I was giving off was like nerves, and like by me being nervous, the kids would get nervous because I was nervous. Yeah. Right. So at the regional tournament, which is the tournament to qualify for the state tournament, right? Top 4 qualify. So the Conti semis, if you win, you go. If you lose, you stay home. Right. Very high pressure situation. And like I like couldn't find my wrestler, or like I forget exactly what happened, but I ended up like sitting on this table against the wall, like a plastic table. And like one of the other assistants came up to me and he's like, dude, like, relax. Like, okay. And then my wrestler came up to me and like tapped me on the shoulder and was like, don't worry, coach, I got this, and like winked at me. And I was like, he went out and stopped the kid. That's 30 seconds. And I was like, yeah, like that's not like we can't be doing this, right? Because like you tell that like they know, and also like I can't control the situation. So it comes back to like controlling what you can control. Like the work's done. Like my job as a coach is to just like make sure that like the match is going as planned, for a lack of a better term. But you can't really do much at that point anyway. So like, why worry about it? Yeah. I had another point. Oh, my second point around confidence. What I know now is just like you have to, like this is my mindset going into anything. Like whether I know what I'm doing or I don't know what I'm doing, I act like I know what I'm doing, and I deal with the consequences later. But I think you have to be confident enough to be able to achieve anything, right? Like you have to go into a situation being confident that like I'm going to accomplish this task, whether you think you're going to or not. But you have to continue to be humble enough to know that you don't know everything. So like that's two opposite sides of the scenario, and you have to use them in tandem. Be confident when you have to be confident, be humble when you have to be humble, and know when it's appropriate to be both of those.
Yeah. It's interesting, and that applies to everything.
It
Business,
does.
life.
Yeah.
But to Aston's point, like one of my biggest takeaways of what he was saying though is like, I remember that feeling. The kids who you were absolutely supposed to beat in a dual meet setting, that was the most nerves you ever had. It was like the guy you knew you beat 8-2 or 8-4 every time you wrestled him. But it wasn't a kid you were going to go stick, you know? So you're like thinking like, all right, I should beat this kid 5 out of 6 times. But if that 1 out of 6 times is like right here in a full gym.
Yeah.
And it's the difference between us beating a team like that. Like, again, that pressure to fail is a huge thing for like instilling in your kids through the sports world. But with wrestling, it really couldn't be more paramount.
Yeah.
You know? Like, because it is mano-a-mano, but it is still a team sport. And that was the other side I wanted to like drill into on that perspective is I vividly remember when we got late into the season for these dual meets, you're starting to wrestle with much better quality teams. And again, me being like a middle of the road kind of guy, but trying to fill that leadership role type of deal is like going to those matches where I still had to be like a captain, but know that my matchup, I was more than likely going to get my ass beat. It was like, don't get pinned.
Yeah.
But there's no other sport like that where like there's one-on-one matchups in lacrosse. Like if you're a face-off guy, you know, like, hey, this is a really good face-off guy. He's already committed to such and such college. You're like, if I win a couple face-offs, that's a good game.
Yeah.
Wrestling, it's like, no, like you need to not get pinned.
Yeah, dude.
And you're sitting there, you're like, this dude is a stud, you know, like, and again, I can't replicate that through any other experiences I have through sports. But in the real world, there's no, again, scenario like that where you're planning how to fail.
Yeah.
You know, like, because in wrestling, you're planning on, all right, this is how I'm supposed to lose. Like, I can't get pinned.
Yeah, it's not necessarily failing, though, because, like, even a loss is almost a win in the team setting. I don't want to go into too much of, like, too much detail around that because it's pretty boring. But, like, not getting pinned is almost the equivalent of winning.
Yeah, for in a certain matchup or dude, see, like I'm like smiling at you guys this whole time laughing because like, dude, these are things that I just wouldn't have ever thought about, wouldn't have ever like. That's why I love diving into like, dude, it's such a wild world and everybody. And again, that's like whether it's wrestling, different things, like to be able to like hear people's perspective of what is going on in their head is fascinating to me, dude. I just like nonstop geek out because it. Like I'm processing as I'm listening to you guys thinking about all of the ways that this relates. Like I'm, you know, it's.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump into a different tangent.
So was I.
But the one thing I was going to bring up was like,
I love it, guys.
Was the conditioning factor, again, was kind of that equal playing field aspect of like, I didn't have to be the best wrestler. I didn't have to have the best record. But when we did those conditioning practices, that's where like that leadership role could come to the forefront without having the ability to be one of the best wrestlers, so to speak. So like, that's the other aspect of like that camaraderie we keep alluding to in wrestling. It's like, look, dude, you'll beat me every time you wrestle me. But when we're doing those sprints or buddy carries or whatever it is, like I'm going to beat your ass.
Yeah.
You know, and like it's that's that competitiveness. And then in hindsight, like the coach that really did a lot of our conditioning, I bump into him because he lives right where I play golf. And that's like the perfect example of that camaraderie from wrestling. We're like, it's the dude, I appreciated it in real time because that was the person I was.
Yeah. All
the other kids hated this coach, right? Because they're like, well, this dude's just an asshole. It's like, no, he's doing it because he really wants to see the best out of you, you know?
Yeah. And you're doing your role. You're pushing the next guy, and you're making everybody else better. And it's
But I'll never forget. It's the only sport where like kids were like throwing up, and you're like, ha, let's go. You know? Any other sport like football, whenever we did conditioning, everyone was such a pansy, like all whining the whole time. Wrestling, you realize it would not get you anywhere, but more punishment.
Yeah,
and the collectiveness of like it was almost like Navy SEAL training, like. if one of the guy fails at whatever the target was, you guys all get another sprint. You guys all get another minute of wall sits or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it was like all being in on the fact that if that guy fails, it's all of our fault.
Yeah.
Because we're not supposed to let him fail.
Yeah. And like
then
you
we're
said,
all fucked.
even if it's the least skilled wrestler on the team, it's still.
It most times was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm laughing just because like it brings back memories.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
You're thinking of the names that you're cursing.
well, it also just brings us back all the way around, like why we were doing it in the first place. Like,
Yeah.
you're putting yourself through hell because you enjoyed it,
Yeah.
right? Like
It's kind of psycho activity,
yeah, it is.
to be honest.
It is kind of.
Yeah. It's nuts. It's
We're
nuts.
not normal humans.
It's a fun, yeah, dude. I mean, it's been so fun to just, to hear, to talk through, to learn the perspective of what was going on in your heads then, what is going on now, and how you think it works towards the future.
Here's my tangent. Like this was like one of the last things like I wanted to like make sure I touched on. It's just like getting kids involved in wrestling. Like I think it's important. Like I really do think that if more kids wrestled, we would have just like a better society. Like I know that's like a hot take, but I think that like it just teaches you so much, and like we make kids go to math class and do English and whatnot. Like most kids aren't going to be engineers or physicists or whatever, and we're making them do these things throughout 12 years of their life, right? Like, so like I do think that there would be value in like having everyone wrestle at like 1 or 2 years, not at like an old age, but at a young age.
Yeah.
Like my kids are gonna wrestle like for a year or two. If they end up hating it after that point, then that's fine. But they're at least going to experience. I mean, like my kids are gonna be around the sport anyway. Like I don't plan on going anywhere.
Yeah.
So I mean,
it's funny. It's funny. I've never thought about it that way either, but it makes sense. It makes sense. And also one of the things that I think, and I won't even dive into it, but like how it gets you in touch with your body and other people's bodies. Like you're rolling around the mat for hundreds, thousands of hours with yourself, others, like physically. And I think that's another thing, as we talked about getting in touch with or like living in the digital world, like people are literally getting so out of touch with their physical bodies. Wrestling, you feel every.
I think gymnastics is big too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I think like kids doing gymnastics at a young age and having body control, like that's like the biggest skill set in wrestling. Like wrestling isn't, you don't have to be the strongest, you don't have to be the fastest, you don't have to be the smartest, the quickest. Like a lot of times it's just like the person who's just the toughest too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because eventually the better and better and better you get, like everyone is all those things. So it's the intangibles that are going to like win you matches.
Yeah.
I think just at a young age, just doing gymnastics, body control, like you're developing those skill sets inorganically that when you do start to wrestle, it comes quicker.
Yeah.
And I think that word too is intensity. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's, again, if you were taking away one word and trying to summarize it, it's like intensity. No matter what capacity of life, like people who can handle intensity are gonna succeed, whatever it is. And intensity could like put it in whatever context you want it to be, but like deadlines at work, not getting along with people you work with, like it creates this level of intensity where you're not just doing everything in this perfect world. And being able to deal with that, like, again, is like a huge takeaway from wrestling is like, you're going to hate 80% of what you're doing most times, but it's like the rewarding yourself with the success factor is the goal, you know?
Yeah. And adversity. I think that's what I think about. Like just and something that it's probably a good transition because again, one of the topics that I discussed with you guys beforehand of, and now this is totally, wrapping up the wrestling conversation, but, the passing of our friend Kelsey Kramer in high school. I was 16 years old. You guys probably 18 years old, 17 years old. Kelsey was 16 or 17. And talk about adversity. I mean, it's still.
It's something that you remember where you were when it happened, right?
Yeah. And for those that didn't have the fortune of knowing Kelsey, because she was literally, I always describe her as somebody who lived an entire life in that many years, which is, impressive, but it was to a car accident, so it was sudden, and it was something that Aston, I think you mentioned, earlier about like all of us dealing with it together as well.
Yeah. So like, there's no like way of handling, like everyone handles tragedy different. Something like that when you're so young too, it's like there's no real concept of it, right? Like the only thing that you have is each other to like grab and hold on to, from the standpoint of like trying to really grasp what occurred. And then ultimately just like perspective at like a really young age that like life is fragile, and enjoy the time that you spend with people. And I think that that's also why our friend group is still very close.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately we experienced something very tragic that impacted us all, and it impacted us in different ways, but it made us start to like cherish the friendships that we have.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that just stuck with me. Like, it's not that bad. Life isn't guaranteed, and just like enjoy the time that you spend with others, really. And then just like as a kid, like it's easier doing something for a greater good or something bigger than yourself. Like, it's always easier doing something for a greater purpose than it is just for you.
Yeah.
And I think at that time we were just like grabbing and holding on to that as a community.
Yeah.
Across all sports, it was really something that you had to live through to experience, but also like realizing that as a young kid, like you don't know how to deal with anything like that. Like at the end of the day, we try to act like adults by having the independence of being able to drive and having the social life. But it was that moment in time, to his point, of like, life is fragile, decisions matter, like you need to be aware, and also like it could be gone tomorrow. But then also like doing something in her memory and having that cause, as he's saying, it was something the whole school got around. But going to his point again, like our friends in particular, it was like, all right, if you can live through something like this,
Yeah.
But you wonder how many of the folks who really struggled for the years following that more immediately, like in some of the bigger issues that some people have had throughout the years, how much of that stems from an incident like that.
Yeah. And that's, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up and talk about it is just to honor Kelsey. And no matter how much time has passed, one of the things that, as I've thought about death more as I've grown older, tried to comprehend my own eventual death, is that like your spirit lives on forever. Mm-hmm. And there's a piece of Kelsey that's sitting here in this room in each of us. And there's an effect that she had on us in, again, her short time here that will never go away and that will live on forever. And I think that that's something, again, of course, right after that happens, for many, 5 years after that, it's more of a constant, and it probably doesn't get talked about as much, but at the same time, it's still in every day. She's still with us, and like that's and my mom, I think, always had a beautiful way of describing Kelsey, as she laughed when she would say she'd come down into the basement, and Kelsey would, like, we had that big couch, that big sectional couch. Kelsey was in the middle of it every single time she came down. Like, she wrapped everybody, no matter what group it was, no matter what sport you played, no matter who you liked, who you were dating, like it was an everybody thing. And I think that was another special thing for all of us. I was telling somebody about, how I was going to talk about this topic and trying to process it this week with, how I would, because it's tough to formulate these thoughts. But I said, I was like, all the bullshit stopped in high school at that point. Cause it was like you said, like, wait, like some of the shit we don't like each other over doesn't matter. And I think that everybody bonded together. And again, we had that Sundays at the Kramers for, a year or two afterwards, which, as far as grieving process for all of us, I guess as I've been thinking about it this week more and more, I just feel so lucky, like, to have all the, like you said, our friend group that still, stays together. And no matter, how much time passes, no matter what it is, like that, again, the lived experience and the, the bonds, like I'll never forget being at the Kent's house afterwards. Like, we stuck together for like 48 hours to get like just all kids, like 30 kids, 40 kids. And then again, like every Sunday, everybody really leaned on each other.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that like bad things have to occur for us to realize like, what we have, and like I think that that's like where it's important just to be like grateful for what you do have and have gratitude, and like get out of the rat race of just like comparing yourself to others all the time, which is like so much in our culture, unfortunately. Like how I describe Kelsey is just like the person of like you don't necessarily remember like what people said or what they did, but like you remember how they made you feel. Like that was Kelsey.
Yeah.
Like to a T. And I think that that's just something that like, I don't know, like it stays with me all the time.
Yeah. I would say, Mike, how, if there's like one thing that, maybe the first thing that pops into your mind or something you've thought about of like how Kelsey's spirit lives on, within you, whether it's, an active, conscious thing or not,
I mean, the positivity factor, I think you were like alluding to it. It's just like, if you try to like, to your point, carry the spirit on, it's more like, all right, with someone who had such a positive mindset, such as her, like how would she want you to view these different types of scenarios that you're living through, and also always falling back on that, no matter how hard the experience is, it's like you're fortunate enough to be 29 years old and, and be in a position to, like you said, like pressure is it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to be put in some of these scenarios where life does get difficult, but you're still here.
Yeah.
And just appreciating the moment.
Yeah.
More than anything. I actually caught up with Mr. Kramer within the past month. And again, it's like things like that just really grounds you in appreciating life, like knowing that we're getting to go through some of the experiences that we're going through that Kelsey wasn't able to, and it's sad when you look at it that way, but it helps you appreciate it.
Yeah. And again, I think that was my big takeaway was that like, dude, for somebody to be so young and to live such a full life is like, that's why it was such a massive impact for everybody, and, a loss at that age and, loss of a child, no matter what their personality is, it's going to, have a massive impact. But, I think that, dude, yeah, she did more good in her years than most people do in their entire life. Yeah.
But it helps you also think back about like keeping things positive, keeping things simple. It's like, how simple was life back then? It was very easy to take for granted, you know? And I just keep thinking, like, I have a cousin who's just turned 13, and it's like, how do you put the words together to coach them through life, but coach them to really understand that you have to appreciate everything you have right now. Even as a 13-year-old, it might seem like there's weird pressures that I can't relate to now.
Yeah.
But it's like, you're in a great spot. Like, you have your whole life ahead of you. You can do whatever you want to do. Yeah. But make sure you live that way. Like, because you never know.
Yeah.
You really don't.
And it's funny that you say that as for a 13-year-old, that's what I think I've been doing some realizing lately is like, we're in the same spot too. We've got our whole life ahead of us, and things have sped up and there's more responsibilities, and, you got to think a little bit differently, but like, there's still a ton of time.
Yeah. I think that like, I still think of myself as a kid. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I do. I think it's always good to have some like youthfulness. Like I want to be old and still be a kid.
Yeah.
What I tell kids now, like from more or less like a coaching perspective, is like, I don't give them advice, but I will say like, find something that you're good at and that you enjoy doing and chase that. And if you do something that you don't like, that's just as valuable as finding something that you do like. Like, recognize that as well. Like, it's important to find things that you don't like to figure out what you do like.
Yeah.
So it's not a loss because you didn't like it. You figured something out along the way. But just be more present when it comes to not what decisions you're making, but like, are you actually enjoying it or not?
Yeah.
Because like ultimately, if you're doing what you enjoy doing, and like that's what would be the ultimate goal for me, is like do something for the rest of my life that I like really enjoy.
Yeah.
I don't like what I do now, but like ultimately it's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So that's what I tell them. It's like, it's pretty simple. Focus on like what you enjoy doing and follow someone that's done it before. Like we are fortunate enough that like we have, it might not be someone directly close to you, but someone else has already done it, and follow them, figure out what they did well, what they didn't do well, and chase that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's funny. When you said that about figuring out what you don't like, I interviewed it like a year ago, and I asked the person, I said, you know, I was whatever. I was like two. So it was like 20, I was like 25 years old. And I asked the guy, what is like the advice that you would give to your 25-year-old self? And he was probably like 40 or so. And he said, advice that he had gotten that stayed with him forever was your 20s is figuring out what you don't like. Your 30s is figuring out what you do like. And your 40s is getting really good at it. And that was more of a business kind of advice thing. But it's, I don't know. I never forgot that.
No, I totally agree. And the other thing is just like stop telling yourself that you can't do something and start telling yourself that you can, because whether you say you can't or you can, you're generally right.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's a pretty simple way to start.
Yeah, I love that one. But just like wrapping up, any final like takeaways, anything that even, no matter how random it is that hasn't been said, but something that, again, with this medium, I've just begun to tell people so much more directly how I think about them, how I feel about them, and the positive impact that they've made on me. So my only hope with having you guys on was that the positive impact that you've had on me can translate to other people who may not have the, fortunate experience of knowing you guys. But if there's anything else, please.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate you having us. I would just, we brought it up so much, but like leaning on the positives, and I kind of opened up with like how I cope with things in general is just trying to focus on those positive things.
Yeah.
As hard as it is sometimes, that's how I get through life, and how it might seem outwardly that I'm always upbeat. It takes work, like people want to like go through different exercises that help other people because that's what they're reading in their self-help book. And it's like, no, you need to find your own mechanisms,
Yeah.
And this is a great example. Is like you talking through this stuff is helping you out. It's helping the people you're sitting with. It's helping the people that are listening. Looking for those outlets where it doesn't always have to be so selfish in nature, in terms of it could be going and volunteering your time, coaching, whatever it is like step outside of the box. Because if you're in a mental spot that doesn't feel healthy, it has a lot to do with your habits and how you shape the way you think around those habits. So you need to figure out whatever it is for you, and it's not going to be listening to others about how they did it.
Yeah.
It's going out and figuring out what it means to you.
Yeah, how it applies. And it's such a beautiful note to end on, because as I mentioned before we started, I was like, I'm talking to a positive psychologist next week.
Right.
So it's exactly that. And yeah, but there's so much to all of this. But dude, thank you guys so much for having this conversation, opening up. I know it's different. It's an experience that I've just loved and enjoyed, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I did. Just like one quick thing to add also, it's just like, if there's anything to be taken away from this, and just like be okay to fail, like have fun, fail, learn from it, continue to grow. No one actually cares. Like, unless you make like a massive mistake and hurt somebody, like no one cares that you failed. And if people say that, like if people comment on you failing, it's because they never tried anything themselves.
Yeah.
It's like the people who failed are the ones that are like, all right, good job, buddy. You'll get it next time type of thing.
Yeah.
So like that's what we were talking about when you were saying how this whole situation for you is like, it's selfish in a way that you are doing this because you want to do it, but you also want to help other people. Right. And I think that sometimes what's selfish for you, that's okay, because what's good for you might be good for the greater population.
Yeah.
Also. So yeah, don't be afraid to try things and make mistakes, and just don't make the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah. I love that. Dude, let's go. Great ending. All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.